What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. What makes a Pokemon good or useful can be up for debate, but it generally comes down to their stats, their moves, and their typing. And one of the most interesting ways to alter a Pokemon's functionality is to pair different typings together. Certain type combinations are brilliant, but sometimes you look at them thinking, they could be better off as one type, and it's true. So let's see which Pokemon could be improved by becoming a single type. Now, I will say I will not change anything about these Pokemon, so clearly dual-typed options will stay that way, and there really needs to be a case for it. Meaning, sure, Poliwrath could be pure water type, but I don't think it's necessarily better off without fighting. And of course, I will not take away any Pokemon that would remove a unique combination from the roster, so obviously Abomasnow's typing is awful, but if I removed one of them, there would be no Grass and Ice-type Pokemon at all. And there's probably a lot more than just 6 that I could do, but let's see which Pokemon might be better off as a single type. Starting with number 6, the Smoliv line. One of the unsung long-running tropes of the Pokemon series has been the small grass-type females that keep popping up, so it's no surprise that Paldea participated as well, although maybe it's a little surprising that it came from an olive, but this entire line is somewhat unique because they also bear the normal type. This is a little odd to me since there have been other food-based grass types that are perfectly fine on their own, so I'm not sure why they would need to be normal this time, but it doesn't really do it any favors. And grass has poor matchups as it is, but the normal type isn't really a juggernaut either, adding an immunity to Ghost, but a weakness to fighting, so it's a net neutral really. Now you might say that normal shines in its move pool, which is usually true, just not in the case of Arboliva maybe? The only normal level up attack that even takes advantage of its vastly better special attack is Terrain Pulse, and all the rest of its few normal moves are generic supporting tricks that you could find on any old type. There's no reason that it needed to be normal in order to use any of these moves. Just look at Tsarina, who gets more normal level up moves despite being a pure grass type, and you can find it in this very region as well, with basically equal defenses but much greater speed. At least the last grass and normal types made good unique use of the combo by including multiple battering attacks with its horns. Maybe you'd say that Arboliva works for being more of a support Pokemon and that it needs normal to stick around as a wall, but I'd argue that it doesn't need to have a fighting weakness just to be able to use Encore, since most of the Pokemon out there don't. Number 5, Rotom. The original Rotom that's electric and ghost is actually fine, and really all of them bore that typing until later when they each got their own unique type based on the machines that they overtook. Fire for the oven, ice for the refrigerator, and so on. This makes sense, none of them are really out of place, but they do drastically alter the matchups that Rotom has, and to me, the worst one has got to be the fan form. When Rotom possesses this fan, it becomes part flying type, which does track, it makes wind after all, but it's a bit strange. Not that electric and flying is necessarily bad, but it's made redundant here by being on Rotom who already had Levitate. Even before it could change forms at all, this pulsating poltergeist had the Levitate ability, so they had to know that going into designing all of the appliances that it can inhabit, so sure, it makes sense for it to get air attacks with a fan blade, but the draw of the full flying type in the first place was the total immunity to ground. So if Rotom was already immune to ground, it seems like all the flying type does is add weaknesses to rock and ice. On paper, that could be better than the original Rotom, but Levitate takes away a weakness on the ghost variant while it overlaps entirely with the immunity of the flying type. So, Fan Rotom has less resistances than the original, not even counting its ability, which makes it even more unbalanced. I guess there is actually an argument that the original Rotom could be better off as pure electric because then it would have no weaknesses due to its ability, but it's unquestionable that the flying variant is basically useless as it is. So until such time that it gets a new ability, you might as well be a pure electric type. Or I guess just triple down and hold an air balloon instead. Number 4, Obstagoon. I'm not even going to talk about the design of these Pokemon versus the originals, but those initial Hoenn Pokemon are clearly pure normal, which isn't out of place for the early game, but in the Galar region these Pokemon not only gain an evolution, but add the Dark typing. This typing was proven not to be the greatest with the last variants that used them in the Alolan Raticate line, since it makes these Pokemon weak to Fairy Bug and quad weak to fighting. This might not sound so bad since it does get 2 immunities and a resistance to Dark itself, But that's all stuff the Dark type inherently had anyway. The normal type adds nothing here, since Dark already resists Ghost, so is an immunity to that really a priority? Or let me put it this way, is that resistance turned immunity really worth doubling your weakness to fighting? Not to me. So I would say these little rockin' raccoons should just be pure Dark. That way they wouldn't have to cower so much from all of the fighting options all over the region. I feel like that's easily worth losing the stab power on the normal attacks, since most Pokemon can use strong normal coverage just fine. Not to mention all of the other attacks that Obstagoon can fire off and still make useful without the power bonus. And it's not as if we haven't seen normal to Dark regional variants before. Meowth made it work, and we already mentioned that the type pairing would still exist with the Alolan rats, so I don't think it would be the end of the world for Obstagoon to fully embrace the darkness and revert to a single type. Number 3. Avalog. Once again, I am not talking about the original, but rather the Hisuian version that we saw arise in Legends Arceus. Now, I actually like Avalog a whole lot, far more than most people who forget about it or have an active distaste for it, so no one loves to see some attention given to this floating ice table more than me. But I'm not sure that they did it any favors. Avalog in the Hisui region, for some reason, gains massive snowplow jaws, which could be useful, but curiously it also becomes a rock type on top of the initial ice. Ice is already bad enough on its own, but something happens when it's paired with rock that really compromises everything. Sure, it adds a couple of resistances, but it adds more weaknesses too, and it creates quad weaknesses to steel and fighting. And when you're as slow as Avalog is, 2 crippling weak points like this is just asking for you to be eliminated. Well, what do we want then? It was already a pure ice type, so if it reverted back, then it wouldn't even need a regional form at all. So I would suggest changing it over to pure rock. If you look at its body, you can see that it's totally made of stone, with only a thin layer of ice on the top, and maybe its head being made out of ice. So if we had to cut its frosty edge, I don't think it would be all that detrimental, and in fact the snowplow feature could stay as a means for it to combat the many ice types that can be found up in the Alabaster Icelands where it lives. You then could have made a pure rock Bergmite if you wanted, it wouldn't be that hard, and it's not like we'd be removing the ice and rock typing altogether, because we've still got the Kalos fossils to fill it out. It may not be the coolest thing to just go from one pure type to another, but it is not unprecedented for regional forms, and it would make Avalog a lot better off without changing much about it. And it could make it much easier to stand out as its own thing instead of just being a clear downgrade across the board. Number 2. The Ghastly line. Being the first ghost types ever and the only ones for a number of years makes the Ghastly line famous by default. But even so, many fans would have loved them anyway, because they can be pretty creepy but also have a goofy side, so there's a little bit for everybody. But being Ghost isn't all they've got. It can be easy to forget, but these Spectres are also part Poison type. I can only guess that this is because the Poison type was so common in Gen 1, and they wanted to make sure that it had more numbers than the Water type, so they included it on these Ghosts. Because really, there's nothing poisonous about them. They are gaseous, but not all gas is inherently toxic, and this really wouldn't be a problem, except that it totally compromises their main objective of beating the Psychic type. That's the whole reason they invented Ghost, right? But even if there weren't a glitch, it totally backfires for these apparitions to be half poison, because Ghost may beat Psychic in theory, but it does not resist it, making the entire Ghastly line completely weak to Psychic. You might think that this could be worth it for all of the resistances that it could gain. You mean like Bug and Poison, which Ghost already resisted anyway? Yeah, I'm not sure the Grass Resist exactly balances out the new weakness to Ground that's included. Granted, Ghastly and Haunter do have Levitate, but Gengar no longer does, so you've gotta watch out for those ever-common incoming ground attacks, all for the added bonus of what exactly? You go ahead and read any and all dex entries about Gengar, and you let me know how many times it references them being venomous versus anything about the shadows or the afterlife. They already had a Gen 1 Pokemon made of noxious gases, so it would have solved so many problems if these Ghosts didn't lose to the one type they were supposed to beat as pure Ghost types. Number 1. Magcargo. If one Pokemon in the entire franchise has it the worst on getting a second type, it's probably gonna be Magcargo. Fire and Rock together are shockingly bad. It seems okay with 7 resistances, so that is nice, but when your combination results in 2 quad weaknesses to water and ground, it makes it a really tough sell. As we mentioned, ground is incredibly common, and as of Gen 9, water is the most populated type, so you'll be dealing with these hazards far more than you'd care to. And let's not forget that Magcargo is a snail, which means that it has some of the most abysmal speed that you could imagine. You're going to get hit first no matter what. And although Fire and Rock isn't great, it is still a little different when a Pokemon starts as a pure Rock type. The Rock type by itself, such as Roly-Coly, has 5 weaknesses and only 4 resistances, so then changing to a spread of 4 weaknesses and 7 resistances instead gives Carkol better numbers, even if it does share in those quad weaknesses. Contrast that with Slugma as a pure Fire type that had a mere 3 weaknesses and only 1 fewer resistance. It's not worth taking half damage from a Tackle now to be weak to Rock, since the Rock type doesn't even resist itself. Not to mention Colossal has better special defense and an ability that could at least let it benefit from having to take Water type damage, so Magcargo would unquestionably be better as a pure Fire type. That's not to say that Rock is out of place with its shell, but if you really think about it, its whole body is made of the same material, it's just a matter of temperature that's making them different. There's a reason that lava bending comes from the Earth Kingdom because it's just melted rock. So if it's all from the same mineral, just molten or not, you could argue that it should be a pure rock type, I suppose, but Slugma is in the exact same boat, being made of the same material, and it gets away with being pure fire no problem. So I think that Magcargo would be fine to stay one type, and then its fancy shell could just give it a bunch of rock-type coverage moves that help take out other fire types. And there are multiple other fire and rock types out there by this point, so I think it would only be in everyone's best interest if this red-hot snail were only one type, proving that just because we can do something, maybe doesn't mean that we should. But I'm sure there are plenty more Pokemon that are dual-typed that could be better off as just one. So, which Pokemon do you think would be improved by being a single type? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded!